The wind came down from the mesa like it had a mind to scrape the world clean. It tugged at the bare limbs of cottonwoods and drove dust across the pasture, scouring what little color remained from the dead grass. Overhead the sky hung low and gray, a dull sheet pressed flat against the earth. Winter had not yet come in full, but the cold had teeth and it bit. Clara stood on the edge of the field with her arms wrapped tight around her middle. The soil at her feet was frozen in patches, cracked and colorless. Behind her, the cabin loomed squat and dark, the door hanging half open, one hinge broken. Smoke didn't rise from the chimney. It hadn't in 2 days. She swayed slightly, not from the wind, but from the lack of food. Her hands, stiff and raw, bore the scrapes of failed work, a fence half mended, a trap unset, a hearth gone cold. Her son Eli had stopped asking when supper would come. Now he just sat on the cot in the corner, small and silent, watching her like he already knew something she hadn't said aloud. Her husband had been gone 6 months, rode into town for seed and never came back. No letter, no word, just the echo of his boots and the absence of his voice. At first she thought he might return. Then she hoped he'd died clean, quickly, out of reach of cruelty. Now she thought of him with nothing at all, a blank where a man had been. She pressed a hand to her belly, not in sickness but in memory. There'd been a time when she was strong, quick with her hands, bold enough to love a man who'd barely scraped together a farm from hardpan and promise. Now the land had turned to stone under her feet, and her heart wasn't far behind. A sudden noise, soft but clear, caught in the wind. Hooves, distant but closing. She stiffened, heart seizing in her chest, mind racing through possibilities. A traveler, a thief, one of the ranchers, come to collect on a debt she couldn't pay. She stepped back toward the cabin, careful not to run. The rifle inside was rusted and hadn't fired true in months, but she kept it beside the door anyway. Ellie's head turned toward the sound. He said nothing, just watched her. The rider came into view slowly. A tall man on a sorrel horse, wearing a coat the same color as the land, mud, sweat, and years of wear. He didn't hurry, just kept on at that slow, steady pace, like he knew there was no sense in rushing a thing. She stayed in the doorway, rifle just out of sight. When he reined in a few yards away, he lifted one hand in greeting, palm out, no weapon drawn. His face was shaded by the brim of his hat, but his voice carried easy. "Ma'am," he said. "Saw the place, looked empty. Smoke's gone cold. Didn't mean to startle." She didn't speak right away. Measured him. His voice was rough but not sharp, touched with weariness, not threat. "You lost?" she asked finally. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Heading north, just cut across the pasture to save a mile or two. Figured maybe someone here needed something." "I don't need anything." He nodded like he believed her, though she knew the lie was plain. "Well," he said, "maybe the boy does." Her eyes narrowed. He dismounted slow and easy and stepped away from the horse. No sudden moves, just the kind of man who'd learned to read silence better than words. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small parcel wrapped in cloth. "Just bread and jerky," he said. "Not much, but it keeps." She didn't move, not yet. Ellie appeared beside her, thin legs bare beneath a too-short blanket. She felt herself relent, not out of trust, but out of something harder to name. Hunger, maybe, or the memory of decency. She took the parcel without thanks, hands brushing his only briefly. It was still warm. Her stomach clenched with the smell. "You passin' through?" she asked, voice low. He looked out across the pasture. For now, no real place to be. "Not anymore." She nodded, not out of agreement but recognition. That kind of drifting carried its own weight. "You'll want to be gone before dark," she said. "I will," he answered. But he didn't turn right away, just looked past her shoulder toward the sagging cabin, the bare hearth, the boy standing still as bone. Something unspoken passed between them, and neither one named it. The man came back the next day. Clara heard the hoofbeats again before the sun had climbed past the ridge. She was at the creek breaking ice for water, her knuckles red and numb. When the horse approached slow and unhurried, she did not startle, just kept working the hatchet, watching him from the corner of her eye. He dismounted and tied his horse to the scrub oak. No rifle in sight, just that same worn coat and a canvas sack slung over one shoulder. "You said you'd be gone," she said without looking up. "I did," he replied, "but you didn't say I wasn't welcome." Her jaw clenched. She stood slowly, the bucket in her hand, sloshing cold water onto her skirt. "I didn't say you were either." He gave a slow nod and let silence settle between them. Then he took the sack from his shoulder and set it down gently on a rock. "Split some firewood. Fixed your front hinge, too. Hope that ain't a fence." Clara said nothing. Her breath came hard in the cold puffing white in front of her mouth. She stared at the sack. She could smell flour beans, dried apple. She hadn't seen dried apple since the last harvest 2 years ago. "I'm not looking for anything," he added. "Just figured you might be close to the end." That pulled her up short. Not the words, but the softness behind them. She'd heard plenty of men talk like they knew what she needed, but none had looked her in the eye like this man did. Like he'd been close to that same end once, and knew there was no pride left to guard when your child looked at you with hunger in his ribs. Still, pride dies slow. "We don't take charity," she said. He smiled, then faint and crooked. "Good. I ain't offering it. Call it repayment. You kept me from freezing to death yesterday. You weren't near freezing. You don't know that." Something in her softened, though she tried not to show it. She reached for the sack and lifted it, surprised by its weight. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jonah." She gave a small nod, as if that meant something to her. "Clara." He glanced toward the cabin. "The boy, Eli, he's 6. Jonah took a step back and gave the horse a rub along its neck. "I'll be out your way by evening." Clara hesitated. She hadn't asked him to stay, hadn't even offered thanks. But as she looked down at the sack in her hands, she realized she didn't want him to go, not yet. "You any good with fences?" she asked. He smiled again, this time with something warmer behind it. "I can be." She turned toward the house. "Then you can earn your keep." That was how it started. A stranger in a dying pasture, hands calloused and voice like gravel worn smooth. He worked like someone used to being watched, quiet, steady, asking nothing. Eli watched him from behind the porch post, half curious, half cautious. Jonah didn't try to charm him, didn't press. Just let the boy come in his own time. He fixed the fence by the well, reset the door hinge, split enough wood to last a week. At night he sat outside by the fire pit, not too near the cabin, just close enough to hear Ellie's laughter when Clara read from the old storybook. He never asked about her husband. She never told him. On the 4th day, Clara brought him a tin cup of coffee. It wasn't much, just wheat grounds and hot water, but he accepted it like it was gold. They sat a while in silence. The fire popped low between them. "You always travel alone?" she asked. Jonah didn't look at her, just stared into the flames. "Not always," he said. "But the ones I rode with, they're not around anymore." Clara didn't press. Didn't need to. Grief recognizes its own. When she stood to leave, he spoke again. "Your boy's got quiet strength. Comes from you, I'd guess." She didn't reply, but the words stayed with her as she lay in bed that night, Eli curled against her side. She stared at the cracked ceiling, listening to the wind scratch at the boards, and for the first time in weeks she didn't feel hollow. The story rides on. Subscribe and don't miss it. Snow came late that year, soft and uncertain. It dusted the ground like flour shaken from an old sack, thin, in places stubborn in shade. The pasture, once brittle and yellow, turned quiet under white. Fences groaned beneath the weight. The air smelled of iron and pine, and smoke curled steadily from the chimney now. Jonah stayed. Clara never said he could not outright, but she began leaving a second plate on the table, started asking for help outright instead of pretending she didn't need it. He slept in the lean-to beside the shed, a canvas roll and wool blanket over straw. She offered the cot once, just after the first snow, but he'd only shake his head. "I've known worse," he said, and left it at that. He was a man of few words, but he worked like someone with something to prove. Not to her, exactly. Just to the land, to whatever part of himself had gone quiet over the years. He mended the roof, patched the chicken coop, hauled water before she could, and always with that same quiet respect, as if the place wasn't his but he wanted it to stand. Clara watched him, though she tried not to. He'd remove his hat before stepping through the doorway every time. He never raised his voice, even when the wagon wheel shattered in the cold or the traps came back empty. Once she found him in the barn, kneeling beside a lamb born too early. He'd cupped its body in his hands, whispering something low, not even meant to be heard. It died anyway, but he buried it beneath the cedar alone, without asking. Eli started following him like a shadow, quiet at first, then bold, then bursting into questions. Jonah never tired of them. Taught him how to lash a line saddle proper, sharpen without waste. Told stories in pieces, usually while working, about rivers that went silver in the dusk, about a mother who'd planted sweetgrass in hard earth, about a brother who carved birds from bone. "Where are they now?" Eli asked one evening, perched on a fence post beside him. Jonah didn't answer right away. "Gone," he said. "Long time gone." And that was all. Clara stood nearby, splitting kindling. She paused at those words. Not from surprise, but from how gently he'd said them. Not bitter. Just true. That night, after Eli had fallen asleep beside the fire, she stepped out into the yard, coat pulled close, scarf tight across her mouth. Jonah was sitting on the porch, carving a bit of wood into something shapeless. "You're not just passing through," she said. He looked up slowly. "No." She nodded. "You running from something?" "No," he said. "Ran already. This is where I stopped." She stepped down one stair. The air was sharp with cold sky, blank with stars. She wanted to say something, thank you maybe, or stay, but the words felt too thin. So she sat beside him instead, knees nearly touching, and didn't speak for a long time. The cold pressed in. The wind stirred the bare branches. Somewhere behind them the horses shifted in the dark. He spoke first. "My father was a preacher. Not a loud one. Thought work was its own kind of prayer. Never raised his hand, but you always knew what he expected." Clara tilted her head. "And your mother? Strong. Gentle. Could kill a chicken and sing a hymn in the same breath." Clara smiled faintly. He continued, voice low. "Lost them both the same year. Fever took my sister, then the house burned. I was 17. After that I just kept moving." She looked at him, then really looked. At the creases by his eyes, the scar that cut through his left brow, the hands weathered by distance and loss. "You think about settling?" He didn't answer right away. Just kept whittling the edge of the wood-soft curls falling at his feet. "Depends," he said finally. "You think about letting someone—" Her breath caught. She stood then, not sure why. Maybe afraid of what she might say next. "I'll make coffee in the morning," she said instead, voice low. "I'll be here," he replied. And in the stillness between them something passed, unspoken but present, like a nail driven quiet into old wood. Not flashy, not loud, but it held. It was late January when the letter came. Clara found it folded under a stone on the porch, no envelope, no seal. Just her name in rough pencil on the outside. She didn't need to open it to know who had written it. The handwriting was too careful. like a man trying hard not to leave smudges. She read it once, then again. Clara, I heard word from Tully down in Silver Point. Said you were still out there with the boy. I meant to come back. I swear it. Just got turned around with work and bad luck. I got a spot now decent enough. If you'll come, I can set things right. Daniel. The world didn't tilt. It didn't end. It just went quiet inside her like snow falling on a field that had already frozen over. Jonah was in the pasture fixing the back gate where the wind had blown it loose. She watched him through the window, his coat dark with sweat across the shoulders. Eli was trailing behind him, dragging a stick through the snow like it was a plow. She folded the letter and set it on the shelf above the stove. That night she didn't mention it. The next morning Jonah found it. She knew by the way he walked through the door, slower than usual, shoulders tense. He didn't hold the letter, just looked at her with something like apology in his eyes, though he hadn't done a thing wrong. She poured his coffee without speaking. Eli bounced on his heels, excited about the snow. "Can we take the sled to the ridge today?" he asked. Jonah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe later if your mama says." Clara nodded, though her hands trembled around the tin cup. The day moved like honey left in the cold, thick, slow, uncertain. Jonah stayed out longer than usual. When she brought him bread at midday, he only ate half. Said thank you too quietly. That night, Eli slept early, worn out from the snow. Clara stood by the fire, arms crossed over her chest. Jonah leaned against the doorway. "You wrote," Jonah said, not as a question. She nodded. "You think you'll go?" She didn't answer. The silence between them tightened like a rope pulled from both ends. "He left," Jonah said, voice low. "You didn't." She looked at him, then really looked. At the man who'd chopped their wood and stitched their fence, who'd buried a dead lamb like it mattered, who had let Eli climb all over him without ever asking for space. "I ain't sure what I owe him," she said. "You don't owe him anything." "But, Eli, he needs someone steady," Jonah said. "Someone who stays." She felt something crack deep inside. A wall she hadn't realized was still standing. Her throat closed around it. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "I've been surviving so long I wouldn't know peace if it laid itself at my feet." Jonah stepped closer slowly. Not to touch, just to be near. "Maybe peace ain't loud," he said. "Maybe it's quiet. Maybe it's just someone not leaving." Clara closed her eyes. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled the letter out, and handed it to him. "Burn it," she said. He didn't move, just looked at her, unsure. "I can't," she said. "If I do it, I'll think of him." "If you do it, it's done." He took it, folded it once, and fed it into the fire. They watched it curl and blacken, the words vanishing without struggle. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing snow from the roof like dust from an old memory. Inside, the room warmed. She turned to him, mouth trembling. "I don't know what this is," she said. "I'm not ready to name it." Jonah nodded. "You don't have to." She stepped forward, laid her hand against his chest. "But I want you to stay." His eyes closed, breath catching. "I already did." The thaw came slow. By early March, the snow began to retreat in thin, shrinking patches, pulling back from the fence posts, leaving behind cold mud and last year's broken grass. The sky lost some of its weight. The wind still bit, but not as sharp. Somewhere beneath the soil, something living stirred. Clara took to working the ground near the barn, turning frozen earth with a rusted hoe, her palms blistered and pink. Eli helped where he could, dragging up rocks, asking questions about what they'd plant. "Carrots," she told him. "Maybe onions if the ground holds." "Can we do corn?" She smiled faintly. "We'll try." Jonah repaired the plow with parts scavenged from the shed and what little he'd brought on his pack horse. He worked with a kind of focused calm, not like a man fixing something broken, but like he was building something new. Evenings came slower now, light stretching a little longer across the porch. They sat outside after supper, Jonah sharpening tools, Clara knitting the last of Eli's winter socks. The boy curled up between them with a book open on his knees. The quiet held. But quiet doesn't mean peace. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge. Clara spotted him first, a silhouette against the pale sky, broad-shouldered, upright, and the saddle horse pale as ash. Something in the posture felt too familiar, too confident. She dropped the feed bucket and wiped her hands on her skirt, breath gone shallow. Jonah came around from the barn, caught the look on her face, then turned toward the ridge. The rider didn't hurry, just came down the slope like he had every right to. When he reached the gate, he stopped, took off his hat. Clara. She stiffened, her hands curled tight at her sides. Daniel, she said. Jonah stood a few feet back, still, watchful. Daniel's eyes flicked toward him, then back to her. I came for you, for the boy. Clara didn't answer. I made mistakes, Daniel went on. I know that. But I'm here now. Got a place set up in Westmore. Works good. I can give you a proper roof schooling for Eli. A clean start. She swallowed hard. You left, she said. I know. You never wrote. You never came. I was ashamed. He stepped forward. But I'm trying to make it right. Jonah didn't speak, but something in the set of his jaw darkened. Daniel glanced at him again. You letting strangers live off my wife now? Clara's voice came sharp, louder than she'd meant. I'm not your wife. Daniel blinked as if struck. Clara. You left us, she said. I buried chickens in snow because we had nothing to eat. I watched Eli shrink out of his clothes. I worked frozen ground with bleeding hands. You were gone. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. Jonah took one slow step forward, not threatening, just there. Clara looked between them. Her throat burned. You think showing up now makes you a father again? She asked. You think I'll run because you offer a house and a name? Daniel's face shifted. The charm faltered. Something old and hard beneath it cracked through. You really want your boy raised out here, he snapped, by some hand that wanders into your yard? Jonah didn't move. Clara stepped closer to Daniel, her voice low. That man gave more to my son in 2 months than you ever did. Daniel's jaw worked. He looked past her toward the house, toward the past he had walked out of and now wanted back. You've changed, he said. No, she replied. I just finally stopped waiting. The wind picked up, rattling the dead grass. Daniel replaced his hat, hesitated. Ellie's still mine, he said. She didn't flinch. Then act like it. Leave him peace. He stared at her one last time, then turned his horse without another word. They watched him ride off, dust trailing behind. When he disappeared over the ridge, Clara let her shoulders fall. Jonah stepped beside her, didn't touch her, just waited. She turned to him, voice hoarse. You think I was too harsh? No, he said quietly. I think you were right. She nodded, tears brimming but not falling. Then for the first time she reached for his hand, not out of need, but choice. He laced his fingers with hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. The sky stretched wide above them, pale blue, no longer heavy. Spring came in pieces. The ground gave way, slowly softening beneath their boots. Birds returned, first finches, then larks, filling the air with brief, sweet songs that made Eli smile without knowing why. Wildflowers pushed up through the frostbitten pasture in shy bursts of color, like hope testing its voice. Clara planted her seeds late but with care. She moved slowly through the tilled rows, knees in the dirt, fingers stained, whispering little prayers she didn't quite believe in but said anyway. Jonah worked beside her without asking what she hoped would grow. They were building something now, not just fixing what had broken. Jonah began drawing up plans for a real barn, sketching them out on the back of a feed ledger. Clara watched him one evening at the table, the way he measured the angles, tongue pressed to his teeth in thought. She noticed his handwriting, small, neat, precise. She'd never seen a man plan something so carefully for land that wasn't even his. "You ever think of having your own place?" she asked. He looked up, pen paused midline. "Didn't seem like it mattered," he said. "Not until now." She reached across the table, touched his wrist. "It matters." That night, after Eli had gone to sleep with dust on his cheeks and straw in his hair, Clara and Jonah stood in the doorway together, watching the stars rise. "I used to dream about getting away from here," she said. "When the winters were bad, when Daniel was gone, I'd picture someplace soft, green hills, water you didn't have to haul." Jonah didn't speak, just waited. "But now," she went on, voice quieter, "I think maybe peace isn't found. Maybe it's made." He looked at her, eyes warm. "Some things are worth staying for," he said. She stepped closer, leaned into him. Her head rested beneath his chin. His arms folded around her like a question finally answered. The next morning, Eli asked if Jonah was going to be his father now. Clara looked down at her son, at the gap in his teeth and the hope shining in his face. She brushed the hair from his eyes. "If he wants to be," she said. Jonah, standing behind her, didn't hesitate. "I do." No papers were signed. No preacher called. But something sacred passed between them all the same. They marked the start of it with a fence post. Jonah carved it from pine, drove it into the ground at the edge of the pasture. Clara tied a red ribbon to it. Eli pressed his small hand in paint and left the print there to dry. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. A few weeks later, Jonah surprised them both with a ring. Nothing fine, just a silver band, likely traded for work or carved by hand. He didn't kneel, didn't speak, just placed it in Clara's palm one morning as she stirred the ashes for bread. She looked at it for a long time, then slid it on. No words were needed. By June, the garden bloomed. Tomatoes, onions, rows of carrots pushing strong. Chickens fattened. The roof no longer leaked. The house no longer felt like a place waiting for someone to return. It felt like a place being lived in. One warm evening, Clara sat on the porch while Jonah and Eli raced sticks down the creek. The sky went gold, then blue, again deepening into dusk. Crickets began to sing soft and sure. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, to the laughter of her son, to the voice of the man who had stayed, to the sound of a life being lived, not perfect, not easy, but real. And in the hush between stars and soil, between loss and beginning, she felt it settle inside her. Home. There's another fire burning ahead. Subscribe to find it.